And welcome on into the Third Round Universal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malmuth here with you, along with Zach Malmuth. Zach, episode 59. What's going on?
Yeah, Brett, I'm really excited now because I'm a week out from one of my redrafts, same redraft that you're in. I have another one coming up as well. We're in the thick of redraft season, and it's a great feeling, Brett. We're just around the corner from football, and I'm excited.
Yeah, it's great that draft is coming up pretty quickly. And yeah, we're right in the nitty gritty of preseason, and cut down day is just a week away from us. I think I speak for everybody when I say that I'm so glad that we're starting to see these full starters coming out and playing. And we didn't really see that in week one. We saw a lot of it in week two. Not really going to see much of it in week three. And so I think that this past weekend was, what you're going to see the most of with the bulk. And obviously, a couple starters here and there going to get the tune-ups. Like, we still haven't heard the New York Jets play the New York Giants. Both teams talking about potentially playing their starters just for a couple drives. And I'm sure we'll see that around the league as well. And, excited to see potentially the comeback of Aaron Rodgers and what that looks like if he's going up against the Giants. And he kind of got into it last year in the preseason. So, with the Giants. And so that should be pretty interesting. We got a great episode on hand for you. We're going to go over our 2024 busts. After last week, we went over our 2024 sleepers. Go check out that episode. Go check out all of our episodes on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, and give us a thumbs up. We took a look at a lot of the dynasty draft that we did and our rookie draft, our rookie rankings. We went division by division. Took a look at all the skill position players, quarterbacks, and kind of gave our season preview. So make sure you go check out those episodes. This week it's going to be pretty similar to our last week. Zach, we came up with two guys each that we think are overrated, and I take bust and as something that is an underrated versus an overrated in their ADP. I use the ESPN current ADP live draft trends, which I highly recommend in your leagues, and you kind of start to get a feel not just for what the ranking might say on sheets, but where guys actually are going versus those sheets. And so let's kind of get into it right now. Not too much news that's out there, and we're still sort of in the waiting game of CeeDee Lamb. We're still sort of in the waiting game of what's going to happen with Brandon Ayuk. And so, I think that next week we're going to have a lot of news come through, and we just talked about this before the stream. Next week we're going to go over our top 25 rankings. Cut down day is next Tuesday, and so we're going to see a ton of guys get cut, a lot of surprises that are going to get cut, and some probably notable veterans. And so excited to break that down. Excited to start talking about the season coming up, because it's right there, and you said it. Like, we have a draft in a week, so pretty interesting. Let's just jump in right now, though, with our quarterback busts. And Zach, we kind of went pretty heavy on the veterans, I think, in this exercise, not as much on the rookies. And we sort of had our say last week about the rookies. We sort of feel that they're ranked. Not too many, debates as far as like busts and guys that are going way higher. We can talk a little bit about your feeling on Malik Nabers in the last week and how that sort of surged when we get to the wide receivers. But let's start at quarterback. You have two guys who are pretty notable veterans and two guys who are making a ton of money in the league.
Yeah, Brett. I'll start off with my first one, and then we'll go back and forth. I'll start off with my first one, and it's a big one. It's our thumbnail today. It's Joe Burrow, who, this one comes down to health, Brett. And obviously last season tore a ligament in his wrist on his throwing hand, missed the rest of last season after week 11. And I feel like it would not be as big of an issue if it wasn't his throwing hand, but because his wrist on his throwing hand, it makes me a little bit worried coming back into this season. Based on it happened in the middle of last season. Yes, he has made a full recovery, but I just don't know. He hasn't played preseason. We have to see how he's really doing once he gets out there. And I feel like it's kind of a big risk if I'm drafting him outside of that top 5 range of quarterbacks, those top 5 guys that we've talked about at quarterbacks. I better be confident that the guy I draft outside of that top 5 is going to play the full season. And I just don't feel that confident with Joe Burrow. He obviously in the past has been a solid NFL quarterback, has been a solid fantasy quarterback. But Brett, we're talking about a guy who's only finished in the top 5 once in fantasy points per game. So it turns to a different avenue of, well, this guy hasn't been a top level fantasy quarterback, whereas we see some upside for some of these other players even behind him, that they could be easily in the top 5 if they're on their game and they play an entire season. So what I would say to that is Joe Burrow right now going quarterback 7. He's also being drafted in the 6th round. I'd say there's probably 3-4 quarterbacks behind Joe Burrow that I'd feel more comfortable with as my quarterback 1, just based on the injury and everything surrounding the situation that he's in. He lost his OC from last year, Callahan, who went to the Titans. And now I'm looking at different situations of T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and I just don't feel confident, plus the injury, that Joe Burrow should be my quarterback 1 based on the guys around him.
Yeah, for me, I kind of went the same sort of rate here. I picked my first guy. It was Aaron Rodgers, and really it just comes down to injury. And it's the same thing that you said. Like, he's coming off an Achilles injury that really obviously is a tough injury to come back from. Rodgers, tried to come back at the end of last year, and we're not really sure of the method that he used, and all these psychedelic things that he's in, and ayahuasca, and on we go. Like, I don't know if he's going to come back and he's going to be 100% healthy the entire way through. He is 40 years old, and he's going to be 41, I believe, in just a few months. And so I think, we have to be realistic. He's not going to be as mobile as he once was, especially with the Achilles. And so for me, this really just – listen, I think that Rodgers will bounce back. I think he will have a good season, but I'm not sure that that's going to warrant him getting picked over a guy like Jared Goff, getting picked over guys like Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels. Like, I'd much rather have those guys than Aaron Rodgers. I'm seeing Rodgers getting picked way higher in a lot of drafts, just basically on his name value. And so I'm not really sure that I want that. And listen, Joe Burrow's sort of in the same boat where it's like, it's named Joe Burrow, and obviously we don't know what's going on with Chase and the contract and all of that. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I think that we've sort of taken this, name value sort of thing and blown it out of proportion. Like, for Burrow's case, like, you can make the argument that, like, Brock Purdy might be able to get picked over him and might end up scoring more fantasy points, even though he might be a lesser name. And you're certainly going to be able to get value on Purdy versus Burrow, getting him a few rounds later and being able to stock up some value there in the in-between rounds.
Yeah, just quickly on Rodgers. I mean, he's in a situation now where he won't need to go really all out. The goal in the end is to win the Super Bowl, not to just put up a ton of yards and everything. Like, it's being able to stay healthy and get his team across the line. Plus, he doesn't run a lot anymore. Like you said, it limits his upside in terms of fantasy. He's a QB2 that you start in a bye week, that he's in that range. There's some people who are taking him as their QB1. I would definitely not recommend that because, like I said, he just doesn't need to go all out. He has a better offensive line, and he also has a reliable run game. He has one of the top running backs in the NFL who he's just going to give the ball to when he needs to. So I think that's a big thing, limiting the upside of Rodgers and definitely puts him in a QB2 range.
Yeah, so just go to your second guy here, which is I totally agree with, and we've kind of beat the dead horse on the one, but it makes sense.
Hey, Brett, who else was on this last year? Both you and I. And look what happened. The quarterback 8 going into last year was not quarterback 8, definitely not in the end. And it's Deshaun Watson, who this year, he's going a lot lower, about that QB 16, QB 17 range. He's going in the 16th round. So this is not based on really ADP. This is just based on my eyes looking at Deshaun Watson, his situation, everything about it, his career so far in Cleveland, and saying, yeah, this guy's not going to be a fantasy reliable quarterback. Even if I grab him for a bye week, I do not trust him at all. I think you look at his Cleveland career so far, it's just been injuries and suspension. Plus, he's played, I think, 12 games. And in those 12 games, his passing numbers, which definitely put him on a different level when he was down in Houston. It was the passing plus the rushing, but he was a really good rusher back then, and that helped his fantasy points a lot. His passing numbers since he got to Cleveland have been abysmal, Brett. He's going, like I said, now he's not going in the range where he's ranked. He's going a little bit lower, quarterback 20 in drafts. So, like I said, not about ADP or his ranking. This guy's peak, though, is long gone. His body continues to break down. I'm just going to keep him far, far, far away from my roster, Brett.
Yeah, 6 games played in the last 2 seasons, or I should say 12 total games played, 6 in each season, finishing his quarterback 35. Like, it's just been really, really bad. The ratio touchdown to interception hasn't been so good. He's taking a lot of sacks on top of that. And yeah, you said it, like the rushing just sort of is not there, way down from what it was in the previous years. And part of that has to do with the protection. I think that the protection he was getting in Houston really spoke volumes to that versus what he's getting here in Cleveland. They're kind of just leaving him out to dry, and that's not exactly been the case. Yes, he does have a little bit of an improved room, but by how much? Because, I went on my rant on Jerry Jeudy. I don't have to rehash that. But I don't think he's that good. I don't think Elijah Moore is really that good. The Jets kind of got out of that while they could. Cedric Tillman, he's been a dynasty target. Really hasn't proven himself since he's come in. And then obviously Njoku and Amari Cooper seem to be the 1-2 targets in that offense. But other than that, I'm not sure he's going to be able to move the ball more. And I really, really think that they're going to lean into Jerome for a bit more here in the early going when, they can kind of let Nick Chubb kind of come back on his own pace and then let him hit the ground running when he comes back. But I sort of think they're going to have to lean into the run here and then, kind of hit Njoku and Cooper and kind of go from there. I don't know that that's really going to have a big output on Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, 100%, Brett.
Yeah, and so for my second guy, I went with another veteran here, and I feel like I just went with the Achilles boys here, but it's Kirk Cousins. And it's pretty much the same reason we've been saying here. I just think like he's not going to be mobile. He wasn't that mobile when he was in Minnesota. And now you take it to another level where he's sort of playing in this offense where everybody around him is super fast. He's not going to need to be mobile. He's kind of just going to let Bijan be Bijan, Drake London be Drake London, Kyle Pitts be Kyle Pitts. Listen, Kirk Cousins is one of the underrated quarterbacks in the history of fantasy football. The amount of times that the guy has finished as a top 15 quarterback is extremely high. Dating back all the way to his last few years in Washington, after he had to come in for RG3 after those injuries, he finished as a top 10 quarterback. Like, I'm not denying the talent. He finished as a top 10 quarterback just a few years ago. And then last year we saw him finish as quarterback 24. Obviously, yes, the injury obviously factors into there. I just think, like, he's not going to have to utilize himself the way that he did in Minnesota, the way that he did in Washington over all those years. I think that it's sort of a different offense that we're going to be seeing run here. And so due to that, you're going to see a little bit less of the throwing bombs, and it's going to be more of the slant routes. And I think that works sort of for this offense. Yes, you'll see a couple Drake Londons over the top. Yes, you'll see a couple Darnell Mooney's over the top. But for all intent and purposes, I think that they are going to slowly move the ball methodically up the field, kind of just wear down these defenses with the speed.
Yeah, exactly, Brett. And I kind of think a little bit of this Detroit Lions offense that we rave about a lot. I kind of see a little bit of similarity in Atlanta based on, I mean, Jared Goff is quarterback, what, 20 right now? And he's got a loaded offense full of weapons. Now, yes, he has two running backs in Montgomery and Gibbs, but I mean, Bijan Robinson's going to get a load of carries this year. That's what we're really looking forward to. As a Bijan owner myself, that's what I'm looking forward to is the loads of carries that Bijan's going to get. And you can say, well, maybe he's going to throw the ball a lot. He's got a lot of reliable weapons. But I think once you balance that rushing attack with Bijan and Tyler Algier, I don't think we see the typical Kirk Cousins fantasy output where he somehow sneaks into the top 10. He's not going to throw the ball as much as he did up in Minnesota. Although he's been fantasy gold, because he does not run the ball himself, it limits the upside. And for that reason, I agree with you based on where he's really getting drafted as some people a low end quarterback one. Yeah, I just don't think he's going to get to that level. He's another guy that you grab him, you start him in a bye week of one of those bigger players, and you see what you get from him. But he's no more than a middle of the pack quarterback too.
So injuries, committees, I'm starting to hear all these words, and it's a perfect segue into our four guys here that we have for our running back bus. Zach, let's start out with your guy, Alvin Kamara, who, listen, the guy almost got suspended last year. Then he almost got suspended this year. Now here we go. And you know, he's dealing with a back injury. So what's your outlook here on Alvin Kamara?
So, I mean, this one, and people say, oh, well, Alvin Kamara's also been a very consistent running back. No denying that. No denying that. However, I think this year is definitely an outlier towards the other years that we've seen from Alvin Kamara. And it's all about rushing. All about rushing here. Because, yes, he missed the first 3 games last year through suspension. Then in the next 13 games on the ground, Brett, this guy had 694 yards on 180 carries. That's terrible efficiency. Plus, he had 6 total touchdowns. 6 total touchdowns throughout those 13 games. Then you look at him as a pass catcher, he was absolutely dominant. He had 75 receptions, second most among running backs, only behind Breece Hall. But his catches, Brett, went for 466 yards. 75 receptions on 466 yards. Also, terrible efficiency. The majority of those are just dump offs. Derek Carr pressured in the pocket. All right, well, I'll dump it off to my running back right there, Alvin Kamara. I think the big thing when you look at that is, okay, well, he's getting pressured a lot. Now, Brett, we go into this year. I'm looking at Pro Football Focus. Guess where the New Orleans Saints offensive line ranked this year, heading into this year? Dead last, right at the bottom. So looking at that, now they had losses in the offseason. They're just not at the level that they were when we saw peak Alvin Kamara, where he's running a ton. He's getting PPR points, where, I mean, he's in the top 5 a ton. I just don't see that this year. He's going running back 12 right now. That's a low-end running back 1. And I've seen his ADP drop, and I agree with it. Some people are taking him a little bit lower in that running back 14, 15 range. And that's kind of more where I'm seeing him. But it's a guy that I'm very worried about based on the offensive line. Just the rushing is terrible. How can you take a running back that does not do well when it comes to rushing? So I think there's guys around him that their rushing output plus their receiving output is going to do better than Alvin Kamara this year. I don't think it's the same Alvin Kamara from a couple of years ago. And another guy that you kind of see, yeah, it's a bit of a name. People know Alvin Kamara and they say, oh, all right, well, he's going to be reliable. I just don't know about that this year, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we saw last year, the vultures of touchdowns, and obviously came from Taysom Hill and plays like that where they would get close and Kamara basically would get touches, couldn't get forward, so they would have to kind of go another route on second down, on third down. They didn't really give him too much of a leash as far as the red zone touches and whether or not he can get it in on second down, get it in on third down. They didn't really give him multiple shots at it. I feel like something to continue this year. Obviously, Kendre Miller battled some injuries, and I misspoke before when I said that he was almost going to get suspended this year. I should say 2 years ago and last year, and he did serve that 3-game suspension. And we kind of were like, okay, well, this is going to be Kendre Miller then, and we kind of got excited. It didn't really win us over in that first couple weeks, and so the door was still cracked open for Kamara, and I think that it still is. For me, really, this just comes down to who is right around him and who you could potentially pick at that spot. Right now, Kamara is being picked 42nd overall. You have Josh Jacobs one spot ahead of him. You have Kenneth Walker just a few spots behind him. Aaron Jones, Ramondre Stevenson, and David Montgomery all right there. Like, I think that those are better options than picking Kamara this year. And it really just comes down to committee and getting those opportunities to score points. So that's why I pick him as a bust as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right. So for me, it really comes down to same kind of a thing where it's like, we're not sure. And it's a lot of unknown, and it's very small sample size for Zamir White. He only got 4 games last year. Yeah, they were amazing. And everybody was like, oh, we got to get on Zamir's train and he's going to be the next Josh Jacobs. And we saw all these kind of ridiculous comparisons. Listen, do I think that he's going to be good? Yes, I do. Do I think he's going to be great? No, I don't. I really don't. I think that everyone in the fantasy community is overvaluing him. I think that everybody's watching what's going on in Las Vegas. We're seeing Dylan Lowry get a ton of carries in the season, something that could potentially be a thing, and they've really fell in love with that kid. And yeah, he's right now the third string, but he's got to beat out Alexander Mattison, who you and I have had way too many conversations about how he's not really good at football, and he's not, and that's sort of catching up with him right now. And so I think that there's a chance that Labby beats out Mattison for the 2 job, and then potentially factors into this run game with Zamir White. And so I really don't see Zamir White getting the heavy load that we could have seen. And the other thing, just, quickly, when they named Gardner Minshew the starter this weekend, that to me cemented this as a bust more so than anything. I think that if Aiden O'Connell was there, they would have leaned into the run a bit more. I think that now that Gardner's there, we saw what the success he had last year coming in for Anthony Richardson, being able to turn Michael Pittman into basically an elite wide receiver in the league, got him paid. Like now he has Devontae Adams to play with, Jacoby Myers to play with. And, oh, yeah, let's not forget about that 2 tandem tight ends in Michael Mayer and Brock Bass that he's got. I think that that's sort of going to be the make of the offense right now. I don't really see Antonio Pierce, just basically letting off the gas and saying, okay, we'll just run the ball. We'll run the ball. We'll run the ball. No, I see this as a pretty heavy passing offense with some good weapons.
Yeah, 100%, Brett. And you really look at the games from last year that people ended up freaking out about in terms of Zamir White. He had 23.3 touches per game in those 4 games, Brett. That's crazy. That's Josh Jacobs numbers. And yes, people then take that and say, oh, well, he's the lead guy and he's going to get those touches. There's no chance he's going to replicate that. Maybe he could get 15 to 18 touches a game. I would not be surprised with that. He's the lead guy right now. However, it's not 23 touches a game, so it kind of limits the upside in the run game. And you mentioned the big decider on my end, and that's the quarterback now. It's Gardner Minshew, who Indianapolis became the most pass-heavy offense I think I've ever seen in terms of fantasy football last year, Brett. And now he's the quarterback. They're not going to really have to rely on the run game. They're going to put the ball in Gardner's hands, find their top weapons, Bowers and Adams of the world. Even Jacoby Myers will be more involved now. And Zamir White could get some PPR value, but I don't think that it's to the level of what he was able to do last year. And people taking him as a low-end RB2 right now, I just think that's a mistake. I think where he needs to be is you could take him as an RB3. That's not really a problem to me, but I would say that don't be surprised if this committee turns into 3 guys all of a sudden, because they're just going with who's hot and really just relying on anybody who can help out this passing game now that Gardner Minshew is at quarterback.
Yeah, I just think there's better options there, especially at other positions. You could just wait around and then go get a guy like a James Conner. Go get a guy like, I don't know, who do we have on here? Like, I mean, there's just plenty of guys. Brian Robinson, who we know is going to factor in a lot more. David Montgomery is there right for him. Like, those are guys that I think that'll have higher impact. And I'm definitely taking those guys over Zamir White. It's too small of a sample size. It's too much of an unknown. And then obviously Gardner Minshew speaks volumes.
Yeah, he definitely does. All right, my next guy, Brett.
Many of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think my next guy might be on every list ever created in terms of who's going to be a bust this year. And yes, there are some people who see the positives in him, but I am not one of those people who says, oh, well, efficiency wins the battle every single time. It doesn't. It's De'Von Achane, Brett. And I have a whole list of reasons, so let's get into it. First, health. He's 5'9". He only played 11 games last year, and some of those 11 games, he wasn't fully healthy. I mean, he missed a lot of games. He had a sprain, then he had another little issue, and he had some knee and toe issues throughout, like I said, in those 11 games that he wasn't 100% healthy. Second, people all of a sudden look at this Miami backfield and say, oh, well, De'Von Achane, like, the efficiency was off the charts, and if he can stay healthy, all of a sudden, he's far and away the top guy. He's going to get all the carries. Hold on a second. The guys next to him, Raheem Mostert, they also drafted rookie Jalen Wright. Last year, in those games, and I know that people all of a sudden are looking at a guy like Achane and saying, well, he's going to get the carries. Mostert, when he was with Achane, averaged 13.9 carries per game to 10.2 for Achane. Then I add in the contract extension that Mostert got. I don't think there's going to be this massive drop from Mostert like people are anticipating. I think there's going to be a drop in touchdown numbers because nobody gets 21 touchdowns in a year, 2 years in a row. But I do think he's still going to definitely be involved in this offense. Mostert will, and Wright will also get his touches. The last thing, people are talking about this run game and everything. The offensive line is worse than last year, Brett. They don't have Robert Hunt. They don't have Connor Williams. Teron Armstead hasn't been able to stay healthy. I mean, there's a list of reasons why this guy going at the end of the third round where, I mean, I'm selecting my set in stone running back 2 or my set in stone wide receiver 2. There's no chance I am taking De'Von Achane at that high value. I would never do that in a million years.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, listen, it comes down to a couple things. Number one, we talk about his committee. And, Mostert, obviously, the amount of touchdowns he scored last year, they add Jalen Wright to that backfield. And they're very pass heavy to begin with. And so, they add Malik Washington to a cast of Braxton Berrios, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill. They go out and they also get Jonnu Smith. And so I think they're going to be passing heavy. And so I don't really see how Achane factors in as a quote unquote workhorse back, being picked right around the range that a lot of these workhorse backs are getting picked. It just doesn't make sense. I'd rather have a Josh Jacobs or someone like that, a round later and take a wide receiver right over in that spot, or even take a quarterback right in that spot. For me, that's sort of where it lies. I just listen. I don't know how you have so many mouths to feed in that offense, or I should say, you have so many mouths to feed in that offense. So I don't know where the points are all going to Achane when they got to go to the other two running backs there. Obviously, Tyreek's going to get his, Waddle's going to get his, and so for me, I just think like, listen, I'm staying away just because of who's there. I get the injury concern, and I think that Achane will end up staying healthy, but yeah, I agree with the size thing. Like that is a concern. And so for me, not even consideration right there because, just of how my draft is going to shake out, I'm planning on potentially grabbing a quarterback at that spot, potentially grabbing wide at that spot, even potentially grabbing one of those top tight ends over there too.
Yeah, Brad, it's the prime definition of a fantasy football boom or bust, and that is De'Von Achane.
All right, so for me, a little bit of a controversial one. I sort of, was thinking about this, looking at the list, seeing where guys are going. To me, it really just comes down to usage. And for me, Jahmyr Gibbs, right now, his usage is basically part of the committee. I think, like I said a couple weeks ago, I think it's going to be the same name of the game here for Detroit. It worked last year. It worked when they were basically pounding it down your throat with David Montgomery. Yeah, they were using Gibbs in the spring game a ton and sort of as that change of pace back. I think that sort of worked for them. And so I don't see them shying away from it. And then obviously, they do the play action, throw it right over the linebackers. It works every single time because they just think that they're going to run. And they did. But then that one time that they were going to pass, they kind of got caught napping, all these defenses. Kind of going to be the same name of the game. So for me, Gibbs, yes, he's going to be a top 10 running back. Like that's not what this is about. It's about how high he's getting picked. And he's getting picked in round 2 right now. A lot of the time in the top part of round 2. It depends on kind of what your league is. I'm sort of shying away from it. Listen, I'll take a controversial guy like Kyren Williams that a lot of people are shying away from. I think Kyren Williams is going to have a great year. I think Kyren Williams is going to have one of those workloads right now that we're calling the workhorse back. And yeah, there's the, shying away from him because, they got Blake Corum. I think that's a name. I think that there's a lot of coach speak that's involved in that. Derrick Henry, another guy who you can pick right around that range. And then obviously, like, there's a ton of really, really good receivers that are there. Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., we can talk. It just kind of depends on how your draft shakes out. I mean, heck, I'm seeing Gibbs getting picked right around the range of Justin Jefferson. That's kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And although I disagree when we bring in the term of bust in this certain selection of Jahmyr Gibbs, I do understand where you can see, all right, well, he still is in a committee and he is going a lot higher than almost anybody in a committee really does. That's the big thing that I kind of take away, that, there's a lot of guys there who are just going to be workhorse backs and continue to move the ball down the field for their teams and not going to really have to deal with another guy right behind them. There's some in there, but nobody's going higher than Jahmyr Gibbs in that range. And that point, I agree with you. I would say the main point where I looked at this and I thought about it because Gibbs is a guy that I'm definitely going to be targeting. If I'm late first round, early second round, that's definitely a guy who I'm going to keep my eye on. But I think the hamstring worry that has just come about of Jahmyr Gibbs, where it could drop his value a little bit. Because we've seen hamstring injuries in the past. They can start to linger as the season goes on, and all of a sudden it turns into a real problem. But the other thing I'll say is we look at the Detroit Lions offense and things have gone right. Everything's been great. We don't wish it upon a team, but like everything's gone perfect for them. They have had no offensive line injuries. Not many of their top guys have gone down or dealt with plenty of injuries in recent years. I mean, it can only go so much. Football is a heavy contact sport, and anything can really happen in it. So from that standpoint, and like I said, I don't wish that upon Detroit, but what if something happens? And you kind of have to worry about that. I think Detroit is a top destination in terms of being just a little bit slightly worried heading into the season. Everything's just been perfect for them. But I look at Jahmyr Gibbs. I wouldn't put bust on his name, but I definitely can see some of the little bit of worries heading into this year.
Yeah, and again, it's sort of like, it's interesting to say bust and what the definition is. That's kind of why we have to do it. Again, I think that Gibbs will end up being those 10 running backs. It's just more so of where he's going, who he's going ahead of. That's a little puzzling for me, and I think that he could potentially finish a little lower than some of those guys he's being considered over. Just some quick housekeeping here. While we got some breaking news that comes in. First off, Deshaun Watson, as we talked about him before, he is set to make his preseason debut, pending a final decision from coach. And on the Indianapolis Colts front, Jelani Woods, the tight end, is expected to have surgery that will repair turf toe. He is out indefinitely. Obviously, Woods missed all of 2023, and now it looks like 2024 might end up being a wash for him as well. To me, that really just speaks stock up for probably a guy like an Adonai Mitchell, who might be one of those depth receiver position that might be able to factor in a little more into the passing game. I think the Indianapolis Colts were kind of hoping that Brock Bowers fell to them, though.
Yeah, definitely. I think it looks like it's more of a top heavy offense in terms of their pass catchers. They're really going to load it into their top guys, the Pittmans and the Mitchells of the world. And I think it definitely, if Josh Downs cannot stay healthy, which he's kind of going through some stuff right now, we could see just the breakout of Adonai Mitchell. And I think that's a big thing heading into this season.
All right, so let's jump right into our wide receiver bust. Zach, a guy who's been at the very top of boards here, makes your bust list, and I think that this is a pretty interesting one. So let's get into it. Ja'Marr Chase here.
Yeah, Brett, it's difficult, and it's kind of the same as a Gibbs situation where you just see the guys around him and you say, "Really, I'm gonna pass up that guy?" Like, just there's things going on right now. The first one is the contract situation. Ja'Marr Chase did not practice. I think he practiced a couple days ago. I think that was his first day of practice, Brett.
Yep.
I mean, but he's not going to play in preseason. I don't think he's not going to really be involved too much. He's waiting for his contract. And the big thing about that is if an injury all of a sudden comes about, oh, my hamstring's feeling tight, my hamstring, and we hate it as fantasy owners, but Ja'Marr Chase is going to sit out a game or two and say, all right, yeah, I'm not feeling up to it. I want to make my money. I'm ready to go. I don't agree with it, and most fantasy owners don't, but that is just the reality right now. And if he does not get his money, which we're seeing the Bengals in the last couple of years, they've proven with T. Higgins that they're really not in too much of a rush to get some things done. I don't know if I can trust Chase where he's going. The other thing I'm going to talk about is the quarterback bust that I had in his quarterback in Joe Burrow, who I'm completely worried about this wrist injury that he's just going to come back and happy daisy and he's going to be okay. No, I don't think it's going to turn out like that. There's going to be things to really be worried about in terms of that wrist injury and just getting back to 100%. I think it's going to take a little bit for Burrow to get to that stage. When it comes to Chase, though, you see those other top wide receivers around him, the Amon-Ra's of the world, the Justin Jeffersons of the world, A.J. Brown. And you would think, okay, well, when those guys, if for some reason a quarterback went down, We saw Justin Jefferson last year without Kirk Cousins and still the exact same Justin Jefferson, the same exact guy. And when you look at that in terms of his numbers and points per game, Ja'Marr Chase was without Joe Burrow, and although it was a little bit small, I would say there was a drop in Ja'Marr Chase when it came to fantasy points per game. I would say he's not going to be a bust in terms of all of a sudden, yeah, he's going to completely fall off. I'm not saying that, but he's going right now 7th overall, Brett. And there's just so many worries. So many worries. The quarterback, the contract, and it's just reason after reason why Ja'Marr Chase may sit out a couple games or just may not be at his peak level week after week after week. So I'm going to say the floor of Ja'Marr Chase is definitely lower this year. I'm going to take a guy in an Amon-Ra St. Brown or a Justin Jefferson or even an A.J. Brown where that floor is higher than Chase. And there's also some running backs around there. Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor. I'd take them over Ja'Marr Chase right now with those concerns. So for that reason, he's not going to be a complete bust. Don't freak out on that. But I do think we have to start putting Ja'Marr Chase towards the second round or just a little bit lower below those running backs that I talked about and those receivers. He's just at that point right now. We're 2 weeks from the season, Brett. I'm very worried about Ja'Marr Chase right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think, listen, for Chase to sit out of practice and basically say, okay, pay me my money, this whole thing that's happening, yeah, it's kind of BS, just to be frank. Yeah, the guy deserves to get paid and all of that, but I think he's screwing his team, and we've seen it in recent years, and it's kind of why I'm a little scared of the CeeDee Lamb thing right now, because we're getting really close to the season, and the more the time lingers on, he's going to have less time to prepare. They're basically going to say, okay, we're going to give you this nice little runway. No, the season's next week, and we got to go. So if you're not ready, then you're not ready, and you're not playing. And if you're ready, then, we're going to push you to 100%, every single practice. That's sort of, you see these hamstrings and things like that start to come out. And it's because you guys aren't conditioned enough, and they can condition with their coaches and all that off the field. But until you actually get on the field and you're playing against your teammates and things like that, you're not really at that level of gameplay. And there's nothing quite like going at game pace, unless you're actually going up against a guy. So we've seen it in so many years, year after year. And, the Jet fan inside me says, okay, I think back to that Revis holdout from 10 years ago, 14 years ago, where he showed up at camp and it was the week before the season. And then he had one of the worst seasons that he's ever had. And yeah, they paid him, but was it worth it at the time for him to sit out so long, or should you have just basically paid him, 3 weeks prior? It's the thing that really does scare me about CeeDee Lamb. It really scares me now also about Ja'Marr Chase. For me, it's a sort of a different route that I went. I went with Calvin Ridley, and listen, it comes down to who's around him right there. We have Tank Dell, who's picked just 2 picks before that. T. Higgins right after that, and I'm really in on T. Higgins right now, and it just comes down to the Chase situation that we just outlined. I'm also kind of in on George Pickens, and it really is. I think that everybody's sort of low on George Pickens right now because it's okay, Brandon Ayuk might go there, and the quarterbacks are good and all these things. Listen, I think that Brandon Ayuk at this very moment wants to be a 49er, and they're sort of just trying to figure out what the deal is. I think if he wanted to truly be a Pittsburgh Steeler, that deal would have already happened. They kind of – it's been out there that they wanted to have a deal in place, and they did have a deal in place with Pittsburgh, and it's sort of just in the waiting game right now. That to me doesn't say that, okay, they didn't pay him, because they wouldn't pay the offer unless they put an offer out to Brandon Ayuk's camp, I should say, from Pittsburgh. So that to me speaks volumes. I think Ayuk will end up staying there in San Francisco. And to me, that means stock up George Pickens. And so to be able to take him, to be able to take T. Higgins, Tank Dell, all right around there. Even Malik Neighbors, who's just a few picks before. Like, I think that those guys definitely more highly ranked for me than it is a Calvin Ridley. And then listen, I mean, we saw a ton of drops last year, and it just kind of got aggravating with Ridley. And he was coming off of a year where he had, the gambling thing and he was out for the year, but there were just too many focus drops. And we sort of saw that in Jacksonville where he kind of lost the starting spot as the number one guy. He was like this surefire number one guy, ends up not really being that down the stretch. And so, yeah, that also is a big concern. Now he goes to a situation where, yes, it's a little bit of a committee, and I say it as a little bit because DeAndre Hopkins is still hurt. Tyler Boyd's still there as well. Chigakonkwo, and then obviously the running game, I think that they're going to lean into those two guys in Spears and Pollard. And so, yeah, there's a lot of mouth speed in that offense as well. Second-year quarterback who didn't exactly prove himself in Will Levis, and he proved he can be an NFL quarterback, but I don't know that he's proved he can be much of a fantasy reliable guy for some of the guys in his offense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, Brett. I think when you look at it, I mean, he is right now the wide receiver one in his offense, in this offense in Tennessee. And yes, based on EDP, it may not seem too much of a big deal, but I mean, there's wide receiver ones going 9 picks or 9 rankings lower than him at wide receiver. We talk about guys like a Deontay Johnson or a Christian Kirk, who are the wide receiver ones in their room. And you kind of look at a Calvin Ridley and say, yeah, maybe he could be closer to some of those guys, even if he's the wide receiver one, taking him over a guy like Pickens, where you feel like it's a little bit more surefire and maybe the floor is a little bit higher. I definitely don't fault you there.
All right, so for you, with another guy that I was really considering putting in this spot, but you take him. So let's talk about Chris Olave.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, I think I'm the New Orleans Saints hater of the day. That's my thing in terms of fantasy, because Chris Olave, I am a former Chris Olave owner, and he drove me bananas last year, Brett, because it looked like in the end, like, yeah, all right, it was a solid season from him, and the numbers really stood out that they were pretty good. But Brett, I feel like there was just so much more to Chris Olave. He only finished wide receiver 16. That, I mean, for a guy that you're taking, where I took him all the way up there in the top 10 of wide receivers, I was expecting something more. He finished wide receiver 16 in PPR, and most people would say, oh, yeah, great fantasy season for Chris Olave. Yeah, no, I just think the ceiling also is always going to be lower when you have a quarterback like Derek Carr. They have a new offensive coordinator, a terrible offensive line now this year, which means there's going to be more pressure on Derek Carr. How is he going to get the ball out more to Chris Olave? That's not to say that Chris Olave won't get those touches. He's going to get his receptions. But I feel like when I'm looking at the top level of Chris Olave, and now he's going as wide receiver 9 in terms of drafts. He's going late second round, 20th overall in terms of ADP. I definitely will not trust Chris Olave that high, because I just haven't seen it from last year now into this year. Plus, like I said, they have a worse offense overall. So looking at that, there's guys in the area that I would take any day of the week. A Devontae Adams, a Drake London, a Marvin Harrison Jr. Every single one of those guys I'd take over Chris Olave, just based on this offense that he has around him with Derek Carr and the offensive line. I don't think he's getting into the top 10, because I think even with last year, there's just so much left on the table, and I don't know if he can get there with Derek Carr as his quarterback.
First 2 seasons, he finished as wide receiver 25 and 19, and now he's going as wide receiver 9. I don't know why we keep playing the same record over and over each year. Derek Carr is not a good quarterback whatsoever. I think that this is going to be a very disappointing offense. And, I just talked about Alvin Kamara at length. And so I don't really need to talk about him much more. I just that the offense as a whole is not good. And unfortunately, Chris Olave is part of that. I think that there'll be a different quarterback there this year. Playing quarterback besides Derek Carr, I think it'll be Spencer Rattler down the stretch as they sort of turn the page and go into the draft and try to figure out what's what and get one of those quarterbacks. There's a lot of them coming out next year in college. And so I think that New Orleans will be one of those teams that tries to hit the reset button. Listen, there's not a ton of competition for Olave, and I get that. Yes, you have Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill, Rashid Shaheed on the every, couple times bomb, and even ATP started to factor in down the stretch here. I think that teams are going to still double Chris Olave every single chance that they get, because I don't know that there's very much else going on in this offense except that. That doesn't work to his advantage. It doesn't. They did it for the first 2 years that he was there. And listen, who reaped the benefits of it? It was Michael Thomas those first couple games, there till he got hurt. That's sort of what we saw because they were doubling Olave every single time. And you and I talked about it last year because I had Michael Thomas on my team. It was great. Listen, he's on my bench and it didn't matter because he never got in the lineup, but he was still getting points. And it was great to just cash in and get rid of him as a throw-in. So that's kind of the name of the game here for Olave. I don't understand why he's getting picked over guys like Devontae. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be a beast. Michael Pittman going to be a beast. Mike Evans is going to be a beast. And I don't understand why Olave is being picked over all three of those guys. Just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, Brett. Top 20, top 17, sure. Top 10, no chance. No chance at all.
Yeah. So for me, I went a different direction. I went a little bit lower down the board. And I picked Jayden Reed. I think that for me, it really comes down to the fact that there are so many guys on this Green Bay offense. They're really good. They are. And Jayden Reed is really good as well. I just think we still don't really know who the number one receiver is in this offense. And it's just because they're all really, really good. And a year ago, we were talking about Christian Watson being the second coming. And all of a sudden, it's okay, well, maybe it's Jayden Reed. Oh, wait, maybe it's Dontavian Wicks. And then, it kind of went back and forth. And yes, it's like when you used to play the ball goes round and round when you were a kid and it kind of just stopped and you were it. Well, he was the number one receiver to end the season. That's kind of how it ended up. And that's kind of where we are right now. But I have all three of those guys plus Romeo Doubs ranked very, very similar to each other. And so to take Jayden Reed at a spot where, you take a look at some of the guys that are there, like Christian Kirk, we were just talking a minute ago, he's going to be the number one guy, even with Brian Thomas coming in. Christian Watson's getting picked a couple picks later than him. It just doesn't make any sense to me why you would take a guy there not knowing he's going to have a significant role in the offense and be the surefire number one. Because, there could be a week where he's the number 4. We don't know. It's just because there's so many receivers in this offense. It's kind of crazy. And listen, they did a fantastic job at the draft, grabbing all those guys, grabbing multiple tight ends. I mean, we don't even know if Tucker Kraft is going to end up coming back from injury and outplaying Luke Musgrave. We don't know how much Josh Jacobs is going to factor in. We don't know how much Marshawn Lloyd's going to factor in. It's just so unknown. There's so many guys. I mean, it's a great time to be a Packer fan right now because the NFL team is set. It just might not help your fantasy team.
Exactly. And I mean, we talk about a guy in Josh Jacobs who we're expecting to just be a workhorse. So that takes more touches away. Whereas last year, Aaron Jones was hurt. They had A.J. Dillon there. They didn't rely on the run game really as much. This year, you would expect them to rely on the run game while they can. They got a top running back in the NFL. So why not? I look at this one and I agree with you. The amount of weapons is huge. The other thing is another thing to mention where he's going, Brett, in the 9th and 10th round range. we did our sleeper episode last week. I think almost every one of our guys, a majority of them, were definitely going in the 9th or 10th round, right there around Jaden Reed and Christian Watson and all the targets in this offense. We would take those guys every single day of the week over this Green Bay offense. Great offense, like you said, for the NFL, but no chance a good one for your fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and a guy we didn't really talk about last week who I think just upped his value in the last couple of days, Najee Harris. Like, that's a perfect guy right there. There's a ton of the guys that are going to have pretty big roles at the running back position. And we talked about waiting at tight end. Like, that's sort of range where we're going to go out, get an Njoku, Jake Ferguson, Brock Bowers, Dallas Goedert, those sort of guys if you're looking tight end. And so, yeah, I just think better options, too many mouths to feed. And I stand corrected because I said that it's not going to help your fantasy except for Jordan Love. If you pick Jordan Love, you're great. I think he's going to be fantastic this year for your fantasy team. But otherwise, it's just a little bit unknown for me to pick a Packer.
Yeah, completely agree, Brett.
All right, so our hate tour of the New Orleans Saints continues as we jump in to our tight end. Zach Taysom Hill is the guy that I have first, and we don't really need to rehash what we just said. All I'll say is he's getting picked in drafts, and I don't understand why. I just don't get it. Yes, you're going to have the couple boom weeks, but how do you know when to start him? So to me, it's a waste of a pick because you can't figure out, okay, well, he's going to score 3 touchdowns this week, and then I'm going to put him in my lineup, and then he's going to score no touchdowns for the next 3 weeks. It just doesn't make sense. To me, it's a waste of a pick. And so I don't have to go back down the path of New Orleans and the offense and all of that. That's my reasoning. I think it's a waste of a roster spot.
Yep. How do you use a tight end who's barely used as a receiver, Brett? You don't. Don't do it. He's never going to be a weekly starter at tight end. So, it makes no sense. Agreed.
All right. So for you, going all the way up the board here, you got George Kittle.
Yeah, I was going to say far and above where Taysom Hill is going. This one may be surprising to some people. I do have George Kittle this year on my bust list because last year, I mean, he ranked 6th in PPR points among tight ends. But the thing about that is people look at, oh, well, he finished 6th. You want to see the wave that George Kittle went on last year? Brett, he finished inside the top 5 in tight end 7 times. He finished outside the top 20 the same 7 times last year. There was 2 times that he finished tight end 8. I'm looking at that and saying, like, how can I really rely on this guy each and every week, especially this year where, I mean, it is loaded at tight end. And the big thing of that is, I mean, you look at last year, it was his worst season since 2017 in terms of PPR points per game. And he still finished tight end 6. That tells me that maybe there is sort of a little cliff coming for George Kittle based on there's a lot of mouths to feed. They rely on McCaffrey a lot. If Ayuk gets the extension, Debo's now healthy again. They added another receiver in Ricky Pearsall. Like there's mouths to feed, but it all runs through their running back in Christian McCaffrey. And to say that George Kittle is a great tight end, completely agree with you. But where he's going right now, 5th round to 6th round turn, he's going tight end 5, Brett. That's ahead of Dalton Kincaid, Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram, who led the entire league in receptions, broke a record for receptions at tight end last year, is going around later than George Kittle. I mean, that tells me all I need to know that, yeah, it's not a guy that I'm going to really pass on. I just think there's other options there, and I'll settle for another guy at tight end in a Kincaid or Ingram that I think are just going to be consistent week after week starters. They may not get the output of the big weeks that George Kittle gets, but the consistency I think is big in this situation, especially in the 5th or 6th round.
I agree 1,000,000% on this one, and I love George Kittle, and I think that Kittle used to be kind of undervalued a lot in fantasy, and sort of just this year, I think we've sort of watched that balloon a bit, and it really just has to do with where we've seen the tight end position go, the Laportas and, Trey McBride kind of did that to him, Kincaid as well, where they're sort of going there. So how do you not pick George Kittle with those guys? He does belong there. I agree with you, though. I just think, like, at the spot that it's picked, I probably would go with a different option there. And listen, that offense also is just really, really good. A lot of mouths to feed. With the Ayuk situation, we'll see if he stays or if he goes. Because if he goes, yeah, it probably does change a little bit of the value, and whether or not I would consider him a bust. But right now, Brandon Ayuk is on that team, and he's alongside Debo and Ricky Pearsall and Christian McCaffrey. Let's not forget about him. So, yeah, I think that the guys that are available there, I would pass on George Kittle with the exception of if Brandon Ayuk is on the team in a few weeks, obviously you're looking at Kittle at that spot.
Yeah, 100%. And that would obviously change my opinion on Kittle as well.
Yeah. For me, my second guy here is a guy that we've also spoken at length about, and it really just comes down to we don't know if he's ever going to really hit that next level because we just haven't seen it yet. Kyle Pitts. For me, it really just comes down to he's played 44 games. He still only has 6 touchdowns. He still only has a few in America. There was one point where he didn't have a touchdown in the United States, and that was just crazy to me. And a couple of years into his career, he only had a touchdown abroad in the overseas games, or in the international games, I should say, one down in Mexico. Listen, I just think it's no sure thing that he's going to end up delivering as a tight end one. We just haven't seen it. A lot of mouths to feed in that offense who have to get the ball. Obviously, we talked London at the top of that list as far as the pass catchers go. And then, two-headed monster at running back with Bijan and Tyler Algier, who's certainly going to factor into the passing game. It's just, listen, I think that, like I said, they're going to slowly, methodically get the ball down the field. Pitts will factor in, but I don't know how much he'll factor in. And yes, the talent is there, but other than that first year where he finished his tight end 7, we really haven't seen it. He finished his tight end 33, tight end 14 the last 2 years. Not enough stock for me to pick him as tight end 9. Definitely better options there. And just the spot that he's being picked, it's a little crazy for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Kyle Pitts and real life. Do I think it's going to be the best year of Kyle Pitts' career? Yes, I do, because I think he's going to get the targets that he's really been looking for. He finally has a quarterback who's going to get him the ball. I think that's the big thing here. However, in terms of fantasy, do I think the floor is very low? Yeah, I think it's pretty low, Brett, because this guy, time after time after time, it was going to be a great year, and it was going to be a great year, and he just completely disappointed year after year after year. And that may not have been all on him, but, I mean, all of a sudden, I don't think that he's going to soar up boards and say, all right, yeah, I'm top of the list in terms of tight end. I just don't see that. I do believe right now, Brett, he's going tight end 8, and I do think that's probably the good spot for him. I do think that's a good place for him. However, the player, so much inconsistent play last couple of years. I think right now, like, he should be going 8th or 9th round as tight end 8, not the 7th round where there's plenty of players I'd take over him. I mean, there's guys in that range, David Montgomery, James Conner, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Swift, like every single one of those guys I would take over an inconsistent, from what I've seen, Kyle Pitts. That's the big thing for me. I think tight end 8 in terms of draft is a good place for him, but he should not be going right around where a guy like Evan Ingram is being drafted. at the end of the seventh round or middle of the seventh round. Like that should not be happening. And for that reason, I definitely would classify him as a bust based on his ADP and where his ranking is.
I just want to take a step back for a second. We talked about the New Orleans Saints just a few minutes ago. Tom Pelissaro, NFL Network, does a fantastic job. Just put a clip out that the Saints just tweeted out. They're doing a nighttime practice at Tulane in front of those fans. And Alvin Kamara has returned to practice, and he is sitting right now in a backfield with fullback Taysom Hill. And the headlines just write themselves. The headlines just write themselves. Okay, let's move on completely from this topic here. Move on to your guy here, Cole Kmet.
Yeah, and I mean, this one's based on not really ranking or ADP, Brett, because he's going so late. He's going as a tight end too, but like he was tight end 8 last year, and so many people can get like excited. Oh well, he was tight end 8. He was great, but let's just reel things in. He's got a new quarterback. He's got a new coaching staff. He's got way more weapons. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, the addition of Gerald Everett. Oh, he's also got the run game in DeAndre Swift and Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. That's too many guys, Brett. So even though he's going later in drafts, I just believe if you're drafting a tight end too and looking for a backup tight end, I think there's plenty of guys around him that I would really rely on more than a guy like Cole Kmet, whether that's a Pat Freiermuth or a Dalton Schultz, who I really know that those guys, no matter what, are going to get those targets. They're going to kind of have a floor in their offense because they're clearly the lead tight end and one of the main weapons, I would say, in that offense. Because there are so many guys, I don't know if Cole Kmet is a main weapon really in this offense anymore. I think he's just one of the other guys behind, whether it's Moore, Allen, Odunze, or Swift. I think those guys take priority over a guy like Cole Kmet. And not to mention, like I said, Gerald Everett coming in. He's going to get some red zone targets, of course, because that's where he's an expert. So that limits the touchdown upside. So everything around it, I would take a lot of tight ends over Cole Kmet, even though he's going tight end 16 and 15th round. That's pretty late. He will not be my backup tight end.
He's not going to be mine either. And it really just comes down to, like you said, like too many mouths to feed. And I feel like that's been a theme of this show. But also I think that's kind of leads you to say, okay, well, this ADP doesn't make any sense because he's definitely not going to replicate that because he's not going to get the opportunity to do so. I think that, I think Rome Odunze is getting the low end of the totem pole here because I think that people were saying, oh, well, he's not really going to factor in. Yeah, he is. And we saw that literally last weekend. Caleb Williams looking exclusively for Rome Odunze. He's certainly going to factor in, and we'll see a lot of 3 wide receiver sets where all 3 of those guys are on the field at the same time. They wouldn't have picked him 9th overall if they weren't going to use him in year 1. He's going to get used. And so, yes, Cole Kmet unfortunately becomes, the odd man out when you factor in more Keenan Allen. I just think it has a lot to do with, the mouths to feed. So he won't be my backup either. And that, to me, I think that the guy to have in that offense right now, DJ Moore, but also I can understand when you want to go out and get Caleb Williams and be your backup and all of that. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. We talked Keenan Allen as a potential sleeper guy later on, and right now he's being ranked as like wide receiver 37, which is kind of nuts. He's been very reliable his whole career. So yeah, to me, it makes sense to put Kmet on that list.
Yeah, and quickly to wrap it up, Brett, I think the excitement that we're kind of seeing in the fantasy football world right now is for those 2 rookie quarterbacks. They are getting a ton of buzz because you're not having to really rely on them as a quarterback one. Some if you're in a deeper league, but most of the time, if you're in a 10-team league, you get a really, really good backup in Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels, based on what it looks like they're going to do in fantasy this season, definitely two guys to keep an eye on, and a lot of people already have their eyes on them.
All right, so that'll do it for us for this week. Our next episode, as we said, top 25 rankings, which we did last year. We'll compare ours versus yours, or mine versus yours. And then it's cut down day that's looming, and that not only goes for the NFL, but that also goes for our Dynasty League as we put our cuts in at midnight after the 4 o'clock day. That should be pretty fun to break down. A lot of trade rumblings in our league, and so excited to see if something goes down that's pretty significant. Any last words here?
Yeah, I mean, it's just I'm so excited to have football back. We're in the preseason mode, and maybe we'll have a few updates for our viewers next week, whether something comes out in camps or preseason, and cut down day looms. So we're almost set for football, Brett. So very excited for next week.
Yeah, it should be pretty cool, and obviously looking into this season, seeing those final touches here, and we get some veterans that are in there, but really it's those final roster spots and a lot of those dynasty spots, and whether or not you keep some of those rookies, keep some of those second-year players, or kind of cut them loose. I'm kind of interested to see that. But until the next one, please subscribe to us. Podcast, give us the thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night darkest before the dawn, we shall rise yet again. For Zach Malman, I'm Brett Malman. This has been the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.